You're my bestest. Yeah. Thank you. See how that changes that whole thing? Almost. I don't even have time to run that back, but thanks. That's good. Good teamwork. So, hopefully you're able to read the scroll. It wasn't too fast for you, what have you, but if you read on the page, I had a plan. I am type A. I knew exactly what I was going to do and where I was going. The chart on the left is what I did plan. And if you've seen this image before, the chart on the right is more realistically what happened to my life. And that's not a bad thing. Funny enough, all the loops and the turns and the dips were part of this whole journey that brought me to this point. If it had been as linear as I planned right now, I would have more cats, and I probably wouldn't be married to an awesome dude, and I'd be, just doing this one same job forever. What has happened instead is I've been on this wonderful journey and experience. And this is what I learned along the way of this journey experience. When they asked me to come and speak, I felt this pressure to tell you guys something amazing about my life. Now, my life has been amazing. It's been pretty fun. But what I realized is that if you had asked me that along the way, maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it didn't seem so amazing. It just seems like I was working really hard at jobs and doing a lot of creative stuff and being really busy and having way too many cats, too. Two's too many. But in reality, what was happening is I really learned how to value something that I would like to share with everyone today. The students here in this room that you might graduate or wherever you're at, where you're at in your school now and what year, what have you, the thoughts of the future and what you're going to do with your life may be knocking on the door, maybe every day. That grade and what grade you get and what internship you get, so important to life. But I'm here to tell you that while there's a lot of emphasis, and contrary to what Facebook will tell you with the constant streams of everyone's constant successes, that is actually the life lived, the ordinary life lived in extra special ways that makes all the difference. And I'm not being cliche when I say that. It's those individual moments that are leading up to bigger moments that if you poo-poo on those small moments, you're going to miss the big surprise at the end. And they happen over and over again. This is not a build up to some major thing. This is your life. And these are the steps you're taking. And I had to learn that kind of the creative way. So true genius lies not in doing the extraordinary things, but in doing the ordinary things extraordinarily well. And this is what I've learned. And so I want to tell you the story about the extraordinary powers of the small but mighty Jayhawk. So, with the theme of superheroes, I'm going to be really honest with you. My favorite superhero is Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games. Even though we think about most superheroes like Spider-Man and Wonder Woman, they're great, they're awesome, they're cool, what have you. Real person, real fictional person, and she's awesome. Thanks for going there with me. The reason why I love Katniss so much is because she literally was living her everyday life. She loved her sister a lot. She was trying to make the best of District 12, doing her chores. She didn't think at the time that really having good skill with a bow and arrow meant much of anything. But that turned out to be really helpful later on in the movie, no? All right. One thing she represents for me is the one quality I've learned that is the extraordinary superpower of superhumans, people who are in touch with our humanity, and that is the willingness to take the leap in the first place. So I actually ended up doing a lot of different things after I graduated from KU, and I did something that one of my good friends called following the breadcrumbs. So I have a good friend, she's a very successful author and writer. She's written for Health magazine, she's penned autobiographies, she wrote a book about Venus and Serena, just very talented. And she said, Erica, I'll tell you, I'll be honest, I never marketed myself. That's not how I got my opportunities. It literally was showing up for the opportunities that were put in front of me. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Look, my whole job is marketing and promotions. You're hurting my feelings. She's like, no. She said, I follow the breadcrumbs. She said, that's not to say that I'm not on social media and I don't promote and share what I do, but that's not how the opportunities came. They came because I paid attention to the small details, and then I had to be willing to take the leap and the risk to go after those things. So for me, a whole bunch of little things showed up for me. I won't talk about each and every one of them in huge detail, but one of the breadcrumbs I followed coming literally straight out of high school here is my love for theater. And that was a breadcrumb that I picked up. And even though I didn't major in theater, I kept it in my pocket. And I loved writing, and so I kept that in my pocket. I followed that breadcrumb to my love and my passion for performance, and that turned into public speaking, and that was a breadcrumb. When I was here at the University of Kansas, I had a moment. I had a serious moment. I was a business major, a little bit creative inside, and I realized I was not happy where I was. I got to statistics and freaked out. And I was ready to exit stage left, and so I started to really download, like, what am I interested in? Well, I've always been a writer, I've always been a creative, but I also like doing this programming, and I'm creative. So I started looking at the School of Journalism. They had this great major called, at the time it was business communications, and I was like, I think that's my lane. I think that's where I'm supposed to be. So I went to Professor Marsh. Here's Professor Marsh, did he make it? Went to Professor Marsh. We discovered this today. Yes, and I was like, I am ready to change my major. I'm making this big decision. I'm taking this leap. I need to be in journalism. He said, look, I'm going to hand it to you real. I'm also, I don't know what you said, but I'm thinking. This sounds like you all those years ago. I'm going to give it to you straight. If you do this, this is going to add another year onto your education. You got to stay here another year. It's going to take you 5 years to graduate. And I looked him in the eye, because this is how I think it went down. I looked him in the eye, and I said, let's do this. Right? Taking that leap. I could have thought about all the other things to do, but the idea of being stuck in a place when I feel like I literally have the inner power to do something different, and it's scary. I'm not saying that I went into it and then go back to my dorm room and be like, I don't know what I did, right? And even editing class in this program made me rethink a few things, but I loved it, and it was a huge breadcrumb that I picked up. It literally changed the trajectory of my career, because everything I've done after that has involved some form of strategic communications. So some of these are the examples of that. I joined a collective of other artists once I moved to Philadelphia. We noticed that there was not a venue for people to really perform regularly. A lot of the venues we were used to performing at had shut down or ended or shifted or changed. We had some open mic venues that were cool, but no for live music and performance and comedians and all that good stuff. So we started The Harvest 7 years ago. And today it's Philly's largest open mic event, and that we've exposed emerging talent to the community and the community to emerging talent. Not to mention joining a great collective of creatives that we share resources and opportunities as well. Second, I worked, like she mentioned in my bio, for Campus Philly. So with a lot of these jobs, my role was actually doing a lot of promotion and marketing, strategic communications to the students who were in that program and to the arts and culture partners. So I think we started with 15 arts and culture partners, and we grew that to over 40 various size arts and culture partners, from the small to the medium to the big. It was really great. I did off the beaten path work and worked for a restaurant. Now, I showed my promotion stuff because I don't have the other stuff for the community outreach, but this restaurant actually does really great work in community outreach and community engagement. And I got this job following the breadcrumbs because of doing marketing, and a friend, while we're sitting on vacation at the beach, says, hey, I think you would be really good at doing this marketing job for this diner. And I'm like, a diner? Why would I want to work at the diner? Well, come to find out, when I got to work at this diner, it was really about community engagement and his work that he's doing there as well. Now, more recently, in addition to my program that I'm working on, I'm working with a program called the Corzo Center. And they specifically work with students who are arts majors at the University of the Arts, connecting them and teaching them entrepreneurial skills early on in their first year of school so they can really be successful in their careers. And last but not least, a new program started by Little Giant Media. I just joined their team as a facilitator for the Institute of Hip Hop, teaching folks who want to start their own businesses tenets that moguls have used to actually be successful in branding and expanding as well. All of these are examples of ways that I followed breadcrumbs. My resume was not required for many of them. It was being willing to take the risk and volunteering myself as tribute. One of my favorite quotes is by Martin Luther King. Is the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in times of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. And so one of the skills is that a superhero has to be able to be undefeated by failure. I like the quote that Thomas Edison said, look, I didn't fail, I just found 10,000 ways it didn't work. Clever. I think that's clever. And my husband's boss says to him, hey, I like quick failures and long successes. But this is what I learned in terms of dealing with failure, because it will inevitably happen. I learned that there are 3 things I could do when I thought that maybe I was failing. I could shift, pivot, or exit. And instead of looking at it as I failed, my life is over, let me eat all this chocolate, I'll be back in a moment, it made me proactive. When you shift, you literally might have to move from the position you were on to do something completely different in a new way. When you pivot, you might keep yourself stationary. Maybe you're at the same company, but you need to do a different position and a different approach. In my sense, I didn't leave the University of Kansas, I shifted majors. I pivoted majors, right? So I stayed here and then I pivoted. And then yes, sometimes it is necessary to get out of there and to exit. But with the process, my father said, when you fail or you make mistakes, you have 3 things you can do. One, you acknowledge it. 2, you create a plan to fix it if possible. And 3, you create an ongoing plan so that it doesn't happen again. And if it does, at least not the same way. So superheroes, extraordinary superheroes, know how to deal with being undefeated by failure. And nobody suffered more than this dude. So if you haven't really went to Mordor and back yet, all is well. All right. One of the things I had to face when I started my organization was meeting failure almost immediately. I started an organization called Small But Mighty Arts because I was very passionate as a creative about creatives being able to have access to resources. I had this wonderful degree from KU, right? My strategic communications were tight. My promotion of my album was wonderful. My flyers were the best, great, but I still struggled with finding opportunities. And I couldn't understand why. Where were the resources? Where were the people to network with? And so with my soapbox speech in hand, my friend said, you should apply for this grant. I did. I applied for it. I got it. Great. You give me money. I'm going to give this money to artists in smaller amounts. I'm going to save the world. They like, go save the world. I started to look for grants to match this grant. Other foundations said, hey, we don't support organizations that re-grant to people. Other folks said, hey, you're not an official 501c3, you have a fiscal sponsor that's close. Not the same thing. So in the first year of starting my program of saving the world, I couldn't save the world. Why didn't anybody tell me that my idea was not going to work in this format? That really stinks, right? So it sent me back to the drawing board. What did I say? You had to shift, pivot, or you have to exit. I was like, look, I'm shifting. I'm going to figure it out. We went back to artists and we said, okay, look, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, we're not saying we're not going to give you money, but just say we're not going to give it to you right now. What else could we give you that's very helpful? And artists told us there's other things they needed. So they needed funding, of course. Small amounts are great because it's faster and quicker. They needed access to space. Where can we do these performances and it's affordable to do it? We need marketing exposure too. Who can help us market exposure? And who are these people that can give us these opportunities? I was like, aha. It did 2 things for us. It made us start thinking programmatically, which funders like, and partnerships were probably better off being able to do that, and it allowed us to better serve artists. So we created different programs that met that need. One was our Creative Genius Connector Salon. That was a networking salon that specifically was to match creatives with people in the arts field and leadership around a topic or a theme. This past month, we talked about finding your creative space. The month for that, we talked about art and social justice and activism, and we've had other themes. And we partner with, I don't know if you've ever been to the Barnes Foundation, but it's a very amazing museum, just one of the best collections ever. And they partner with us because they want creatives in their space. So it was a partnership that also was mutually beneficial for our missions. We did another program where we did a creative strength swap where we matched artists with each other, teaching them how to barter. And then we took a step up the next year and taught them how to really build partnerships amongst each other as well as other organizations and businesses. I love my marketing. I love my marketing, my advertising, and so artists said they needed connection to resources. We put out a monthly resource newsletter that advertises call for artists, other grants and funding opportunities, events, and that goes out to more than 2,500 artists at the moment. And if anybody knows about stats, your readership and your open rates are probably around like 18-20%. We keep a constant 34 to 36% open and read rate, no matter how many people we add to the email list. So it's a resource that they need. And over to the left, you can see These are some of the artists that we funded actually this past season. We do it once a year. And all these artists use these funds, and they use them more immediately, we find, to go on to do wonderful things. So meeting with that immediate failure put me into a mode immediately of having to shift. And I'm here to tell you, as extraordinary superhumans, you'll be asked to do the same thing, and you can do it. Last but not least, most important, hands down, hashtag team goals. No man or woman or person is an island. And really, the way that we come sometimes into our purpose and knowing our true power is by bonding together with other people who are also aiming for the same goal or similar goals. And here you are in a room surrounded by peers. These are going to be your connections in the future, or they should be. Same thing with your professors. Somebody asked today in class, what can I be doing now to build my career? And I suggested a website that you can go to and connect and build meetups among people who have shared interests. And the time to do it is now. Like I said before, my resume is only just supporting what I've already told somebody that I can do, but it's been my relationships. It's been people who know what I do and believe in what I do, and vice versa, that we partner up. Every program that I do with my organization is done in partnership, whether that's with a community organization or another person. That's one of the reasons why we're small but mighty. We have to be nimble, but that has actually been a lesson for life. It's everything I do, I try to do it in partnership with someone else when we have shared mission and shared goals, and that has taken me a lot further. So I want to bring back home this point, because a lot of this is just talking about these breadcrumbs that I followed and the challenges along the way, but these are everyday things. These are not something big and magical and different. We need more people in the world, literally, that are highlighting the fact of being an everyday, ordinary person is pretty awesome as well. The work that you'll go into with communications and publicity, even though it's asking us to be big and public and front-facing, is also asking us to tell authentic, real stories about ourselves. It's also asking us to get in touch with what we really, really are passionate about in life. And that's difficult to do if we're trying to live so big and loud that we forget that the small steps along the way is what gets us there. So I asked this question in reverse. If we think about superheroes a little bit differently, what if I told you instead that Superman actually we thought about as being Clark Kent? Now that's kind of funny to think about with journalism students, because isn't it pretty magical to have this dude go from fighting crime and that being where he's recognized to being the dude that can actually write you like a 500-word story by 5 o'clock with full edits? I think that's pretty super powerful, right? Right? I just want to be the one to remind you all that what you're doing right here is pretty special and pretty extraordinary. And you're going to find along the way, months from now, years from now, that this moment is probably one of the most critical moments to your career, as much as all the other ones. And don't be afraid if the line doesn't go straight in a row. If it has some bends and curves, that's fine too. Superheroes have had to learn how to dodge and duck and weave for a very long time. But we at the University of Kansas think you can do it. You come from good stock, right? Thank you so much for letting me speak to you today about your extraordinary powers as a reminder. And thank you so much, and I feel very grateful from being from the University of Kansas, where I've been able to actualize my superpowers over the years as well. Thank you.
Andy Marcer.
Thanks. Thank you. So the key to being able to get organized is to make sure you write a really long introduction for yourself. So you can Now, I don't have a PowerPoint because I knew somebody like Erica would have like a really awesome PowerPoint, so I figured don't even bother. So I'll just go. So everything happens for a reason, right? How many people have heard that here? Right. It's just the worst, right? It's the worst. Well, let me clarify. There's a couple different ways people use that phrase, and one way is clearly worse than others. The worst is when people say everything happens for a reason to somebody else who's going through something difficult, challenging, someone who's grieving. And I get why people do it. I think they mean well. It's kind of one of those things that people say when they don't know what else to say, right? But I don't think it's very helpful. And I also think it's kind of emotionally evasive. Like, I think that in our culture we have this problem with sorrow, with like sharing somebody else's sorrow. We're really good at sharing somebody else's happiness, like celebrating with somebody, and I think we're good at sharing somebody else's anger. You know, like you can see that at some political rallies, not naming any names, but for some reason when it comes to that emotion of sadness, it's like awkward for us, right? When somebody we love is sad, and we don't necessarily know how to connect with that sadness or engage with it, and so like we want to push them forward into some future time when they're not going to be sad. So we say something like, I know it's tough now, but everything happens for a reason, which, like I said, it's not very helpful because people need time to grieve, like when something terrible happens. That is a very natural, normal part of the human condition. And so I would suggest an alternative, something else we can say to people when they're in that sort of a situation. We can say, I'm sorry you're going through this. I care about you when you hurt. And if there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. There's a guy named Tim Lawrence who wrote a pretty good essay about this very phenomenon, in which he called, everything happens for a reason, platitudes cloaked in sophistication. And he suggested 8 words as an alternative, which is, I acknowledge your pain, I'm here with you. I like that. It's good. I like mine better, of course. I'm kind of wordy, but he sums it up pretty well in 8 words. So anyway, that's why I don't think you should ever say everything happens for a reason to somebody else who's going through something difficult. There's another way that we kind of use that phrase, and that's when we kind of say it to ourselves. When we're going through something challenging or hard, we can say like, okay, well, this is tough, but everything happens for a reason, which is not quite as insensitive, obviously, but again, I don't think it's super helpful. Because, again, it's meant to be comforting, and it's meant to give you this sort of sense of this will all make sense someday, but it's kind of fatalistic, right? And it's kind of like a passive mindset in which we're suggesting that our lives are being acted upon by these forces that are outside of our control. And I think for some people, it's a statement of faith, kind of a remix of the old, it's God's will or God's will be done. And to that, I just want to say, like, personally, I believe in God. I also believe in free will. And there's, centuries and centuries of deep theological debate about reconciling those two ideas. So I'm just going to delve really deeply into all of that right now. Just kidding. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that to you guys, I promise. I'm going to tell a personal story that I hope will kind of encapsulate how this sort of played out in my life. So, some of you may know the background of this story. In 2004, I went from, normal college student one day to almost dead the next day to, 3 weeks in a coma and then 4 months in the hospital and amputations of all, yada, 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 et cetera, But as I was laying there in that hospital bed when I first woke up from that coma in 2004, there was a lot that I had to kind of make sense of, right? So I woke up, and to me, it was like just the day before I had been fine and then starting to feel a little sick. And I remembered going to the hospital, but I didn't really remember much of anything else. And then suddenly I'm waking up, and I got this tube down my throat. I can't move my hands and feet. It was very strange. And so at first, when I kind of became aware of my surroundings, I had all these people coming into my hospital room and telling me, wow, this is what happened. It's a miracle that you survived. This is incredible. And so I was thinking like, well, that's pretty good. Must be some reason that I'm still here because, everything happens for a reason. But I also recognized that something was not quite right with my limbs. And what had happened was this bacterial infection had gotten into my bloodstream. And so that whole 3 weeks that I'd been in a coma, I had lost circulation to my extremities. and my hands and feet were more or less rotting while still attached to my body. So when I woke up, I had to kind of adapt to that somehow. And my life to that point did not prepare me for that challenge. I grew up solidly middle class, 2 loving, supportive parents, not a whole lot of challenges whatsoever, and I didn't seek out a whole lot of challenges either. And I remember quite clearly, when me and my brothers would ask my parents when we were little, we would ask well, are we rich or are we poor? And my parents would always say the same thing: we're comfortable. We're comfortable. And that's actually a pretty apt description of my childhood up to that point: comfortable. And then suddenly, things were decidedly uncomfortable. And I had to make sense of it. So, when the doctors told me what had happened and said, best case scenario here, you're going to lose some of your fingers and toes, I just couldn't really accept that. I just kind of turned my mindset straight to the denial setting and just left it there. And I felt like, this is not going to happen. They're wrong. Rather than facing reality, I kind of daydreamed about some cosmic twist of fate that was going to turn my circumstances around, and it was all going to make sense. This thing that I couldn't wrap my brain around would all make sense because everything happens for a reason. So I was telling myself that, and telling myself that there had to be some reason for this other than me spending the rest of my life with mangled limbs. And then I found out that this girl that I had a crush on in high school was going to come and visit me in the hospital. And my brain started concocting this really stupid reason, really stupid, which was that she was going to come and realize that she was in love with me, and then that love was going to magically heal me, and I was going to go back to living my normal life, but now with her, which is really dumb. I mean, and there's being romantic, and then there's being totally out of touch with reality, and I blew right past that line, and so literally none of that happened, of course. She and a mutual friend came and visited, and they left. And when they left, I was still in that hospital bed, and my arms and legs were still mangled. And it was really good that that happened to me early in my hospitalization, because it was a reality check. And it was kind of like, okay, Marceau, this is not a fairy tale. This is really happening. And you can't spend, too much of your brain power worrying about why it's happening. You got to figure out what you're going to do about it. How are you going to react to this situation and try and deal with it? And so I took that mindset, that new mindset, and I started to change my approach. I started to, go to my physical therapy sessions in the hospital, even though my feet were mangled and it hurt like hell to try and walk on them. And that mindset, it helped me fight through months of painful treatments in the burn unit at KU. Honestly, stuff that I didn't even know existed as medical treatment. It was so painful. And it helped me push through the surgeries and ultimately the amputations that I didn't, want to accept were going to happen, but did happen. And it helped me push through the incredibly dull monotony of a year of physical therapy and occupational therapy, trying to literally get back on my feet and also learn how to feed myself, dress myself, take a shower, go to the bathroom on my own. I was 22 years old and I had to ask my dad for help every time I needed to go to the bathroom. So it was very much like you got to get up every day and tell yourself, okay, what am I going to do today to try and improve this situation a little bit? And I learned to accept that life was not always going to be comfortable. Sometimes it was going to be painful and difficult, and there's going to be no way to avoid that or kind of rationalize it away. You just have to deal with it, essentially. And rather than worrying about why, just accept it, try and figure out how to change it as best you can. So that was part of what spurred me to write a memoir a couple of years after I got out of the hospital. While I was in the hospital, there were several nurses who said, "Oh, you're in journalism, you got to write a book about this." And I was like, "Yeah, let me figure out how to hold a pen again, and then maybe I'll think about the whole book writing thing." But it definitely planted a seed. And I'd always wanted to write a book anyway. I'd always thought it was cool conceptually. I'd never really felt like it would be cool to actually put in the work to do something like that, but it seemed to be like a fun idea to have written a book. Not so much the writing of the book, but having written the book. So anyway, I knew I had something to write about finally. So I sat down and I started doing the work. I made a conscious decision to start it and finish it, first of all. I wasn't going to just, quit halfway through, no matter how hard it got. And part of that was because I just had this experience of, going through this rehabilitation process in which I wasn't allowed to quit, because physically that would have meant essentially going into a nursing home. So I knew I had it in me to essentially finish a big project, something that was going to seem like a slog at times. And so I started it, and I also very consciously made the decision to tell it very honestly and intensely personally, because I felt like that would be the only way to tell the story correctly, to do it right. I told myself, if you're going to do this, you can't sugarcoat this. You have to be honest with all of the stupid thoughts that you had and the stupid things that you did and said. And so it's not always the most flattering portrait of me, but it's honest, and I think that's important. And I got to work, just day after day, typing out what I remembered with what's left of my thumbs here. And as I was writing the book, I found out that there was this really awesome side effect from writing it, which was that it was therapeutic. Since I had been discharged from the hospital, so this was for years, I had been having these nightmares about what happened to me in the hospital. And I realized that I'd suppressed a lot of it in my subconscious mind because I just didn't want to deal with it. And so then it would come up at night in my dreams. And writing about it forced me to bring it into my conscious mind, analyze it, really go over the experience to get to the point where I could actually legitimately accept it. Okay, this happened, and it's okay that it's happened, and now what am I going to do with it, essentially? And so it would have been completely worthwhile even if it was just a project just for me that nobody else ever read. But I was fortunate at the end of 2013 to get it published. And a guy named Doug Thompson, who cuts my dad's hair, happened to read the memoir. And Doug happens to have a pretty dramatic story of his own. About 20 years ago, Doug was kidnapped. A stranger burst into Doug's home one night and took him. He was on the run. He had robbed a liquor store. He'd killed a police officer. He needed a getaway car. He broke into this random house, took my dad's barber, took his car, and drove away. And Doug obviously survived because he was able to read my memoir 20 years later. But so Doug asked me if I would be willing to write about what happened to him that night. And because I had that experience of writing the first book and knowing that I could take on a project like that and finish it, I said, yes, let's do it. And so I spent the next year going through hundreds of pages of court records about what happened that night. I interviewed people like Doug, and the police officer's family is a guy named Officer Brian Kleinfelter. And Officer Kleinfelter's parents are amazing. And getting to know them, just that alone, that relationship, has been one of the great privileges of my entire life. Officer Kleinfelter's parents have managed to publicly forgive the men who killed their son, which I find that somewhat unimaginable. Even to this day, I get obviously choked up about it. But the grace that they showed in that situation, it helped them heal, and it also helped that whole community where I grew up heal from this really traumatic event for the whole town. But when I interviewed them, Brian's mom told me that one thing still bothered her deeply about that night, 20 years later, and that's that she thought her son died alone out on that highway. And then one day, as I'm going through these court records, I find a police interview with a woman named Tiffany, who was 17 years old at the time. Tiffany was driving by, she saw Brian get shot, she turned around, stopped, and stayed there with him. Sorry. She stayed there with him, comforting him while he died. And somehow, despite multiple court trials over several years, Brian's parents had never heard about Tiffany. And so I was able to find Tiffany, and I was able to get her together with Brian's parents. And I was there when they thanked her for the kindness that they showed their son, that she showed their son, on that road that night. And I tell you, as you can tell, it is something I will never forget. It will always be one of the most meaningful things I've ever been part of. And as I was driving home that night, I started to think about all of these unlikely circumstances that led me to that moment that day, that really profound moment that I never would have predicted having in my whole life. And I realized I could draw this straight line from those terrible days, first days in the hospital, to writing the memoir about them, to Doug reading the memoir, to this meeting between Tiffany and Brian's parents who just needed that one last bit of closure. And I remember thinking it was all interrelated. The good, the bad, the tragedy, the triumph, the unforgettable. One would not have been possible without the other. So everything happens for a reason, right? No. I also realized that I made choices all along the way. I chose to get up every day and work at my rehab so that I could get out of the hospital, so that I could get back to my life, so that I could get back to writing. I chose to spill all of my emotions out into that memoir. I chose to keep trying to get that memoir published after about 36 or so rejection letters. I stopped counting after a while. Eventually got that one letter that mattered. I chose to keep going. I chose to say yes when Doug asked me to write that second book, even though I knew essentially what I was getting myself into. I knew it would be a major project. And I chose to request those court records and go through all of them because I knew that if I was going to do this, I had to tell the story right. I needed to know everything I could know about what happened that night. So none of that would have happened if I had sat back passively waiting to find out what this all means. None of it would have happened if I hadn't decided I was going to control the meaning of my own experience with meningitis. And so what I've learned is this. Yes, everything happens for a reason. But we ultimately get to decide what those reasons will be. And that's all.
Please join me in welcoming Johanna Maskell.
Thank you. You know, I do have some slides. I don't know if anyone can help plug this in. I don't know if it's lovely.
Audio with you?
No, I don't have audio. I said Erica and I hit on a lot of the same points. All right. Let's see. But at least I don't have audio. I didn't plan ahead well enough to have my audio. Let's see. Okay, can I do this and play? Okay, and then what do I press? Just forward? Okay, I think I've got it. I was in Cairo, Egypt in 2009. I had planned the president's visit to Cairo. I was part of the advance team. I was the press lead, so I'd done a number of different meetings with delegation. About 10 days of preparation went into the visit. It was the visit where he was going to address the Middle East. And we were almost there. The plane was about to land. In these visits, what happens is you roll out, the host country rolls out a red carpet. They set up some sort of a welcome ceremony. You get the press set in an area that they can watch the welcome. And you get the military all lined up. Basically, the Secret Service and the military forces start controlling the area. So the trip is just about there. President is about to land. We have made, this little clicker is not working. Let's see how I can get it over. We have made the preparations. You see people sweeping off the red carpet. Air Force One is landing. And I go to walk forward. My job at this point is to greet the delegation and the press and show them where to go. So we're going to go under the Air Force One's wing. We'll record him getting off the airplane. We're going to go on to the speech site. I go to walk forward. An Egyptian security guard stops me and says, "No, you can't go. I have my credential." I literally had sat in chain-smoking general's office so that I could get these credentials. I said, "No, I have my credential. I can go." And he said, "No, you can't go." And I was like, "I'm part of the delegation. My job is to go meet the plane. I need to go." And finally he says again, "No, you can't go." I realized this isn't working for either of us. So I walk to the back of where the press is. I walk to the other side. I walk right past the other Egyptian security guards, across the red carpet, to the back airplane stairs. I get my delegation, and we go. This little clicker is not working, so I'll come back. Okay. It doesn't work. Okay, so anyway, what did work is I found another route. You know, I don't take no for an answer. I'm not very good at that. You know, when I was a little girl, I had really big dreams. I don't know if you guys have watched the movie Zootopia. I love the movie. I have a 4-year-old, so this is very much in my wheelhouse now. There's a scene where Judy Hopps is hopping along, and her family tells her, you know, she wants to be a police officer, the police bunny. And her family tells her, you know, "Judy, you know when we got really happy? It's when we just settled. And then we were happy." And so, "Judy, you should just settle down in your dreams." You know, I grew up in Galesburg, Illinois, and that's kind of what people said. We're happy when we settle. You've got big dreams. That's so nice. Good luck with that. I came to the University of Kansas, and actually, Lawrence, Kansas was the most optimistic place I'd ever lived. I loved Lawrence, Kansas. I threw myself into absolutely everything. I got involved in the sorority, in student senate. I was in the NAACP. I was in the Multicultural Resource Center. I was involved in virtually everything I could get myself involved in. I had run a voter registration drive the night Gloria Steinem was coming to campus. They were inviting a few select students to go meet Gloria Steinem over this dinner. And I was very lucky to be invited. I don't know if everyone in the room knows Gloria Steinem or everyone who's watching it remotely, but I have found a lot of classes don't. So Gloria Steinem is a leading women's rights advocate. I often say I would never have gotten to where I am had Gloria Steinem not come before me. I went to this dinner and I asked her, you know, I'm turning 21 tonight. It was my 21st birthday. It truly was my 21st birthday. My mom and my aunts were visiting. Would you have time to come for wine with us? And she said, you know, yeah. Can I bring my friends? And I said, yes, of course. It was amazing. So I get to go to wine with Gloria Steinem for my 21st birthday. It's a really old picture. But, you know, for me, it was incredible. I asked her all sorts of questions, and she answered them in how she dealt with anyone, you know, who didn't agree with her in what she did in her life, and it was just so inspirational. At the end of the dinner, I said, or at the end of drinks, I said, I want to be Gloria Steinem. How do I do that? And she said, you don't want to be Gloria Steinem. You want to be Johanna Maska. You want to be the best version of yourself. When I graduated the University of Kansas, the best version of myself, that was still a big question. Who was Johanna Maska? I was trying to figure that out. I had no idea what I wanted to do. My parents hadn't graduated from college, but my mom's advice was get health insurance. And my dad's advice was don't do what I did. So this is the advice I had. Thankfully, I read a lot. I read, Pope Bronson had written a book, What Should I Do With My Life? And what I took away from it was people who were really happy had found a sense of purpose. For me, I had always loved politics. I came out to my family of Republicans as a Democrat. I often joke, but truly, when I told them all that I was a Democrat and that they were all going to regret their vote, and I had a lot of opposition at the table, and I had an uncle who went and had choice words with my dad afterwards saying, "Wow, your daughter." I won't say what I said earlier, but that is, it was impressive. You know, I loved politics, and so I realized, well, maybe, that could be a sense of purpose. At the time, I was really lucky. Governor Sebelius was the governor of Kansas, and I loved her, so I figured out a way I could get in touch with people in her office, and I said, I will do anything. I don't care what it is. They put me in first as an intern, and I get a role doing assistant to the press secretary. I'm doing clips, I'm doing anything they need. I moved to Iowa actually for my husband's job. My husband and I had been dating our senior year in college. We stuck together as partners after that. My husband got a job offer in Iowa. He had gotten a couple before then. It was like Missouri, and I was like, no. They said Pennsylvania. I'm like, no. And then they said Des Moines, Iowa, and I was like, maybe. We had some friends who had worked in Des Moines, Iowa for the Human Rights Campaign, and they said, you will love Des Moines. Love Des Moines, I did. Love Iowa, I did. I went there and I threw myself into politics. I got involved in a gubernatorial campaign. I actually would go on to work in state government. I would lose campaigns, and it was actually the best thing that happens. It's that quote that when you're at your bottom, how you react is kind of more important than when you're at the top. I truly believe that it is true. You have to get up every single day. When I even heard President Obama was considering running, I had watched him in 2004 give the Democratic National Convention, and I had heard him talk about my hometown, Galesburg, Illinois, and talking about Kansas values and his Kansas values of hard work and perseverance. I connected with him, and I wanted to see him become the next president of the United States. So I figured out who was going to move to town, who I could meet, who would have any connection to President Obama. Paul Tooze was going to be the state director, and he tells this story now, and he laughs. He moved down the hall from me. It was totally coincidentally. I went to a party, I met him, I said, where are you gonna live? He said, 10th Street Law. So I said, that's where I live. I said, what floor? He said, 5th floor. He said, I said, I'm on the 5th floor. That's fantastic. So I did the very Midwestern thing of welcoming him to town every day. I would bring him baked bread. I would tell him, I want to work for this candidate. I will work for this candidate. I will do anything for this candidate. He tells the story now and laughs because I didn't know this, but he would go, because our apartments were on the 5th floor, and my apartment was right next to the elevator. He knew that I would hear the ding when he got off. So he would actually go to the 4th floor and walk across the floor and walk up a set of stairs to go to his apartment to avoid me, because he knew I was going to be like, I'm going to work on the campaign. And he didn't have any jobs. I mean, President Obama was considering running. So this whole thing, he always laughs. Thankfully, he eventually relented. My persistence went off, and I got a job working on the Obama campaign. He said, you're going to do press advance. I had no idea what gift he would give me. My job was setting up events. It was literally setting the stage for history. It was working with journalists to let them in, working on negotiations with foreign leaders. It was an incredible opportunity. But in Iowa, at the very beginning, when he didn't have gray hair, it was a little different. It was not going to be a sure thing. In Iowa, Iowans are very skeptical. So they don't necessarily see a candidate come to town and be like, oh, we love you. They say, oh, we're undecided. I saw it turn when President Obama started telling a story. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard the story of Greenville, South Carolina, a little lady in a church hat, fired up, ready to go. But what happened was during the campaign, he had promised a local legislator, yes, I'll go to your little hometown to win your vote. And he really regretted it the morning he had to do this because it was a very long way from anywhere. He had driven a long way. He was in a bad mood, bad New York Times story, rain, just not very happy to be there. And so he would tell the story that he would go to this event, he's shaking hands with people, and a little lady in the back of the room starts yelling, fired up, ready to go. Fired up, ready to go. And he starts looking over and going, why is she upstaging me? I'm running for president. And then, you know, what's funny is he would say, you know, after a little while, though, he starts feeling kind of fired up. And he starts feeling kind of ready to go. And he says, you know, if one voice can change a room, one voice can change a state, one voice can change the nation, one voice can change the world. I truly believe that, even to this day. We went on to win Iowa. I drove 30,000 miles in Iowa in about 7 months. We would engage every small town in Iowa, and I was there for caucus night when the president said, you will all look back and you'll know that it started here. I consider myself very lucky. I went from the campaign straight into inauguration. Here, let's see, I have to pass forward. This was on the campaign trail, 30,000 miles, onto inauguration and straight into the White House. I accompanied the president to 40 countries. I would go to more without. I would go to almost every state. And I would go, and my vantage point was literally right in front of him with journalists so that they could capture history. You know, again, incredibly lucky, Marine helicopters I got to see the pyramids in Cairo with President Obama. I got to see Gandhi's house. This is actually Martin Luther King's signature when he slept at the Gandhi house. I went to the Great Wall of China. I flew over Petra and King Abdullah's helicopters. This is actually Petra, which by the way is awesome. Go to Petra. But what I have to say is, the coolest thing I've ever done is have my son. So I had my son in March of 2012. My husband and I welcomed a little baby boy. It was not always easy. We did not have any family in Washington, D.C. We didn't have really any help. So when I first had Hugh, just cart him with me to the White House. I brought him in at 3 weeks. I was literally negotiating over credentialing in the delivery room, which, by the way, is an awesome trump card. So I said, I'm going to keep this short because I'm in labor, but I'll control credentials, and I got him. So 7 weeks after I had him, I was in Afghanistan planning the live address to the nation. 1 year after Osama bin Laden's death, my husband and I would often trade off. I would wave him into my office to sit with Hugh, or I would push Hugh over to the schedulers. Little Hugh became quite a frequent visitor. Here's him and my husband in the West Wing at Halloween. At some point I realized with my son, here's my little son, you gotta love Hugh. There's Hugh, all his glory. At some point I realized this was an incredible job. I had the opportunity of a lifetime. But I was in China when I found out that we were going to go to India. One of my friends was Deputy National Security Advisor. He said, you get to go to India. We're going to do Republic of India Day. We're going to go visit the Taj Mahal. I would normally do the pre-advance. So I would go in advance and I'd look at all this. And there was no part of me that wanted to go. I miss my son, and more importantly, my son was saying, Mommy, I miss you. And so I made a big transition. What's interesting is, my husband and I both made a conscious decision to step back and to move to California and have an entirely different lifestyle. where we get to enjoy all those moments with our son, where we get to be involved in his parents' group, and we love it. I will say, I've said this a couple times in classes, and I think people seem to understand. We have images for how women are supposed to fit and how men are supposed to fit, and it really is, it stands out to me when my husband goes to breakfast with my son, and they say, "You are such a good dad." And then when I go to breakfast with my son, they're like, "Why can't that woman control her child?" Really drives me crazy. Worst things in the world. Anyway, having my child, best thing I've ever done. I can tell you now, this is 12 years after I've graduated, and I am very proud to tell Gloria Steinem who Johanna Maska has become. And I will tell you that there were many, many times I could have given up, and I could have stopped. I was so tired. I literally slept less than post-childbirth when I was on that campaign. Post-childbirth, I was again very tired. I stayed at it. That tenacity, that ability to hold on is really important. My mom, when I was moving to California, I'd made this decision to move to Los Angeles, big decision. My mom had had a book signed that I had written when I was in the 4th grade, when I was 10 years old. I hadn't seen this book in some time. A Secret Service agent had seen my mom get the president to sign it somewhere, and he's like, "That is the sweetest thing that your mother did." I guess it was a surprise, and I'm like, what are you talking about, Mike? This book, in the book, I say that I'm going to be the first woman president of the United States, and about 10 years later, I was going to move to Hollywood and write movies, which my mom gave me when I was on my way to move to Hollywood. I actually agree with Erica that it's not linear. It's kind of all over the place. And by the way, I haven't been president, and I don't write movies, so there are some caveats. But tenacity at its root means to hold. To hold is to hold firm to your beliefs, to hold firm to your dreams. And I realized that that's what I did. I sought my internal motivation, my internal sense of purpose, and I held on. I held true to what I wanted to do, and I have to say, I've gotten to live my dream. That's it. Thank you. Couple more pictures.